In the annals of paranormal history, few cases have captivated the public imagination quite like the events that unfolded at 966 Lindley Street in Bridgeport, Connecticut. This is the story of what many consider to be the most haunted house in America, a tale that challenges our understanding of reality and the supernatural. On November 23, 1974, the quiet streets of Bridgeport were overwhelmed by a sea of curious onlookers. Thousands of people, drawn by rumors and news reports, crowded around a small, unassuming bungalow. They had come to witness something extraordinary, something that defied explanation. Little did they know that the events at 966 Lindley Street would become one of the most well-documented cases of paranormal activity in American history. What sets this case apart from other ghost stories is the sheer volume of credible witnesses. Over 40 hours of interviews were conducted with police officers, firefighters, paramedics, and even priests. These weren't gullible tourists or attention seekers. These were respected members of the community, trained observers whose jobs required skepticism and level-headedness. Their accounts would challenge everything people thought they knew about the supernatural. To understand the events of 1974, we need to go back in time and explore the history of the house and its inhabitants. The house at 966 Lindley Street was built in 1923, a modest three-room bungalow measuring just 738 square feet. It was located in a lower middle-class neighborhood near St. Vincent Hospital, an area of Bridgeport known for its hard-working, blue-collar residents. In 1960, Jerry and Laura Gooden purchased a home and began their life together. Jerry Gooden's life had taken an unexpected turn. As a young man, he had dreamed of becoming a priest, dedicating his life to spiritual matters. However, the harsh realities of the Great Depression forced him to pursue a more practical path. He became an electrician, working for 23 years at Harvey Hubble, a manufacturer of electrical equipment in Bridgeport. Despite the change in career, Jerry never lost his spiritual inclinations, a factor that would play a significant role in the events to come. Laura Gooden had a different background. She grew up in a Native American home, an experience that set her apart from many of her peers. Her childhood was marked by isolation. She had few friends her age, which led to social difficulties that persisted into her adult life. This sense of being an outsider, of not quite fitting in, would become a recurring theme in the Gooden family story. In 1961, joy entered the Goodens' lives with the birth of their son, Gerard Gooden Jr. However, their happiness was short-lived. Gerard was diagnosed with cerebral palsy, a condition that would require constant care and attention. Despite their best efforts and unwavering love, tragedy struck. Gerard died of a fever at the tender age of 6, leaving his parents devastated and their home eerily quiet. The loss of a child is a pain that no parent should ever have to endure. For Jerry and Laura, it left a void that seemed impossible to fill. However, less than a year after Gerard's death, they made a decision that would change their lives forever. They chose to adopt a young Native American girl named Marcia. Marcia's early life had been far from easy. Before joining the Gooden family, she had suffered abuse, leaving emotional scars that would take years to heal. The Goodens, still raw from the loss of Gerard, became overprotective parents. Their intentions were good, but their approach would have unforeseen consequences. Marcia's life in Bridgeport was not easy. She struggled to make friends at school, often finding herself isolated and alone. The other children, sensing her difference, targeted her for bullying. The situation became so severe that after a particularly serious incident, the Goodens made the drastic decision to remove Marcia from the public school system and homeschool her instead. This decision, while made with the best intentions, further isolated Marcia from her peers. It's important to note this background because some theorists believe that the family's troubled history and traumatic losses may have created a vulnerability, an opening that allowed supernatural forces to enter their lives. Whether one believes in such theories or not, it's clear that the Gooden family was under significant stress even before the strange events began. The haunting when it started was subtle. In 1972, 2 years before the major events that would attract national attention, the Goodens began to hear strange noises in their home. It started with knocking sounds and rhythmic poundings against the walls that defied explanation. At first, they occurred only at night, disrupting the family's sleep and filling them with a sense of unease. But soon, the knocking continued into the daylight hours, a constant, eerie presence in their home. Unsure of what to do, Jerry reached out to his neighbor, Officer John Holsworth of the Bridgeport Police Department. Holsworth, a practical man not given to flights of fancy, suggested they make a tape recording of the noise. This decision would prove crucial in documenting the early stages of the haunting. In the early hours of the morning, between 3 and 6 a.m., Jerry and Officer Holsworth walked to the house with a tape recorder, following the knocking sounds. What they captured was chilling. The noises seemed to move, spanning the entire length of the building. Every knock felt like something was moving through the walls, announcing its presence. In the weeks and months that followed, every possible mundane explanation was investigated and ruled out. Firemen surveyed the structure and foundation of the building, looking for any natural cause for the sounds. Gas and plumbing technicians inspected the lines running through the house, searching for loose pipes or pressure issues that might explain the knocking. Law enforcement officials reviewed potential neighborhood sources, such as local children playing pranks or nearby construction work. Each investigation came up empty. The knocking continued, defying all logical explanations. As time passed, the phenomenon evolved. The knocking became more frequent and more insistent, but it was no longer alone. New, even more unsettling events began to occur in the Gooden home. Family members reported seeing spectral hands and ghostly appendages that would appear and disappear in the blink of an eye. Sourceless footprints would appear on floors and carpets, as if an invisible entity were walking through the house. The physical manifestations escalated. Windows would suddenly shatter without any apparent cause. Curtains would fall from their rods as if yanked down by unseen hands. Each new incident seemed to be an escalation, a show of force by whatever presence had taken up residence in the Gooden home. And always, after each new manifestation, the knocking would intensify, as if celebrating its latest feat. Despite the increasing frequency and intensity of these events, the Goodens tried to maintain a normal life. They were a proud family, not given to hysteria or attention-seeking behavior. They feared that if they spoke too openly about what was happening, they would be labeled as crazy or worse. So they endured in silence, hoping that whatever was plaguing their home would eventually tire of its games and leave them in peace. But on November 23rd, 1974, everything changed. The events of that day would thrust the Gooden family and their modest home at 966 Lindley Street into the national spotlight. The day started normally enough. Jerry and Laura had gone out to do some grocery shopping, leaving Marcia at home. When they returned, they found their daughter asleep in her room. Jerry noticed that the television was face down on her bed, an odd occurrence, but not immediately alarming. He replaced the TV on its shelf and joined Laura in the kitchen to put away the groceries. What happened next defied all logic and turned their world upside down. As they stood in the kitchen, dishes began to rattle in the sink. Before their disbelieving eyes, plates and cups levitated into the air, circling around the kitchen as if caught in an invisible whirlwind. Then, with a loud crash, the dishes smashed into pieces, raining shards of ceramic across the floor. Shocked, Jerry moved to investigate, but the assault wasn't over. Knives sprang from the knife block on the counter, flying through the air with deadly precision. They narrowly missed Jerry, embedding themselves in the kitchen wall. The knife block itself, securely mounted to the wall, suddenly broke free, screws tearing loose from their mounting. But the most terrifying sight was yet to come. The refrigerator, a hulking appliance weighing over 300 pounds, began to rise from the floor. It floated in midair, rotating slowly as if suspended by invisible wires. Laura, frozen in shock, didn't notice as a nearby television set toppled over, crushing two of her toes. In the aftermath of this terrifying display, the Goodens were in shock. They tried to deny what they had seen, to blind themselves to the impossible events that had just occurred. They carefully cleaned up, turned off the kitchen lights, and ate dinner in the living room as if nothing had happened. But the activity wasn't finished. Throughout the night, furniture continued to move on its own. The kitchen table and chairs would topple over, only for Jerry to silently straighten them again. Curtain rods fell from almost every room in the house. And always, there was the knocking, louder and more insistent than ever before. The next morning brought no relief. Jerry awoke to find the kitchen once again in disarray. As he moved through the house, he saw that pictures of Christ and crucifixes had been torn from the walls, a seemingly deliberate act of desecration. But the worst shock came when he checked on Marcia. In her bedroom, a heavy wooden bureau had crashed to the floor during the night, missing her sleeping form by mere inches. Goodins realized they couldn't handle the situation alone at this point. The events had escalated beyond anything they could explain or control. Overcome with fear, the family huddled together in the living room. As they held hands, the room's 3 recliners opened and closed on their own, rocking like invisible sitters. The television turned itself on, playing an endless loop of a doorbell sound, a mockery of normalcy in their now haunted home. Unable to bear it any longer, the Goodins fled their home. They felt isolated on their front lawn, facing an unknown force that had invaded their lives. In desperation, Jerry called Officer John Holsworth back to the house. While the family waited on the porch, too terrified to re-enter their home, Officer Holsworth went inside to investigate. What he found left him shaken to his core. The interior of the house was in absolute disarray, far worse than what the Goodins had described. Furniture was overturned, objects were strung about, and there was a noticeable sense of wrongness in the air. As Holsworth moved through the rooms, trying to make sense of what he was seeing, he experienced firsthand the inexplicable phenomena. He would later report that as he straightened a television set, it immediately levitated and returned to its original, crooked position. The recliners in the living room began to open and close violently, as if angry at his presence. And most terrifyingly, he saw the refrigerator begin to move towards him, defying all laws of physics. Overwhelmed and frightened, Holsworth fled the house and radioed for backup. In his report to the precinct, he stated unequivocally that he believed he was witnessing something supernatural. This report, coming from a respected officer known for his level-headedness, would be crucial in lending credibility to the Goodins' claims. The police response was swift. Officers Carl Lombardo and Joe Tomac were the first to arrive on the scene, reaching 966 Lindley Street around 10 a.m. As they entered the home, they found the interior in even worse condition than Holsworth had reported. After a brief investigation, the officers assisted the Goodins in righting some of the furniture and television sets. But the paranormal activity was far from over. As Officer Tomac straightened the television set atop a bureau, he watched in disbelief as it began to float, swinging back and forth like a pendulum. This was witnessed not only by Tomac, but also by his fellow officer and the Goodin family. Word spread quickly, and more law enforcement personnel arrived at the scene. A second patrol car brought officers George Wilson and Leroy Lawson. Now, 5 seasoned police officers were present in the house, all witnessing phenomena that defied explanation. They gathered in the kitchen to brief each other on what they had seen, trying to make sense of the impossible. As they spoke, the refrigerator once again began to levitate. The officers, trained to look for logical explanations, investigated every possible cause. They examined the wall, the ceiling, and even went down to the basement to check beneath the refrigerator. They found nothing that could explain how a 300-pound appliance could float in midair. The activity seemed to escalate with the increased attention. One officer fled the Goodin home after a crucifix, securely pinned to the wall, spun around its mounting nail before flying off and striking him in the chest. Another reported hearing the family cat speak, an experience so unnerving that he declared he was ready to quit the force rather than return to the house. As news of the event spread, more people were drawn to 966 Lindley Street. Firefighters arrived to inspect the home structure, looking for any natural explanation for the phenomenon. Paramedics were called to tend to Laura's injured foot, and perhaps most significantly, word reached Ed and Lorraine Warren. noted paranormal investigators who had worked on many high-profile cases of alleged hauntings. The Warrens arrived with Father William Charbonneau and seminary student Paul Eno. By this time, the street outside the Gooden home was packed with onlookers, held back by police barricades. The scene was chaotic, with emergency vehicles parked randomly and a visible sense of excitement and fear in the air. Inside the house, the Warrens began their investigation. Lorraine Warren, known for her psychic abilities, reported feeling overwhelmed by negative energy as soon as she entered. In Marcia's room, she became physically ill, developing a sudden and inexplicable burn on her wrist that began to blister as they watched. The phenomenon continued unabated. The smell of sulfur, often associated with demonic presence in folklore, began to permeate the house. It seemed to be emanating from Marcia's room, adding another layer of fear and speculation to the already tense atmosphere. As night fell, the events took an even more sinister turn. A heavy cold settled over the kitchen, and the overhead lights began to flicker ominously. Witnesses reported seeing a cloud of yellow mist form in the room, within which the outlines of 4 figures could be dimly perceived. It was at this point that Jerry Gooden underwent a frightening transformation. He began to recite the Mass of the Dead in Latin, a language he had no knowledge of. His voice was described as unnaturally deep and utterly unlike his own. He moved through the house, sprinkling holy water that had been left by a priest, all while continuing his eerie chant. Paul Eno, the seminary student, reported feeling an overwhelming sense of rage emanating from the mist. In a moment of bravery or recklessness, he pushed through the fog to grab Jerry. What he felt, he would later describe as a physical presence, bony and bird-like, utterly inhuman. The events at 966 Lindley Street had now captured national attention. Reporters from local TV stations and radio outlets converged on the scene, and the story was picked up by the Associated Press, spreading across the country. The Goodens, private people by nature, found themselves thrust into an unwelcome spotlight. As often happens in such cases, speculation and rumors began to swirl. Some believed that Marcia, with her troubled background, was the focus of the paranormal activity. Others suggested she might be causing the phenomena herself, either through psychic abilities or elaborate trickery. The Warrens, drawing on their experience with other cases, posited that the entity in the house might be feeding off the family's fear and trauma. Amidst the chaos and speculation, a twist in the story emerged. Officer Tony DeLorenzo claimed that Marcia had confessed to him that she was responsible for the events of the past few days. This claim, however, was met with skepticism by many of the other witnesses. How could a young girl have made a refrigerator levitate or deceived so many trained observers? Nevertheless, the idea of a hoax began to gain traction. The Bridgeport police superintendent, eager to bring the disruptive situation to an end, latched onto this explanation. The around-the-clock police presence and ongoing investigations were straining the department's resources, and the national attention was becoming an embarrassment to the city. Despite the numerous witnesses and unexplained phenomena, the case of the Lindley Street poltergeist was officially dismissed. However, many questions remained unanswered. How could so many credible witnesses have been fooled? How could objects as heavy as a refrigerator be made to levitate without any visible means? And if it wasn't a supernatural occurrence, what exactly happened at 966 Lindley Street? To this day, the house still stands, a silent witness to the events of 1974. Some believe that something still lingers within its walls, waiting to reveal the truth about one of America's most baffling paranormal cases. The story of 966 Lindley Street continues to fascinate and perplex, serving as a reminder that there are still mysteries in this world that defy rational explanation.